everybody. Welcome to class. Frank Markow here. I am your instructor for effective conflict intervention. This week, we are going to shift gears and we're going to be talking about negotiation. Negotiation. What do you do if you have a conflict with somebody and you can't get past it? Well, in a lot of organizational and business contexts, we negotiate, right? And so this isn't something that comes naturally necessarily. So there's some good principles and some good skills and approaches that we can take to negotiate. So far in the class, we've been talking about different types of conflict, conflict styles, the emotional side of conflict. We're going to shift gears this week. We're going to talk about negotiation and how to develop negotiation skills. So hang on, get ready for an introduction to all things negotiating. Here we go. Now, by the way, this idea of principled negotiation comes from a couple of guys, Uri and Fisher, and the Harvard Negotiation Project. Now, this project's been going on for a long time. It's been very helpful. It helps individuals. It helps organizations. It even helps countries. These principles have been used internationally to bring warring tribes together to help them to negotiate and get past intractable conflicts. And they wrote a book a while back called Getting to Yes. It's kind of a classic in the business book world. But if you really want to learn more and do a deep dive on negotiating principles, if you like this approach, you will probably want to pick up their book, Getting to Yes. So, there's 4 principles according to this approach here, and I'm going to go through them. I'm going to give you a couple of examples here to maybe help you apply these to a real-world situation that you could relate to, okay? So, the first principle is separate the people from the problem. Focus on the issue, not the personal attacks. Now, isn't it just human nature? As soon as we have an issue with somebody, a conflict, we immediately attribute it to their personality, to their recalcitrance, to their stubbornness, to their weirdness. We just immediately begin to look at personal reasons why this person is opposing us, why we're getting into a conflict. And so we don't want to focus, the first step here is don't focus on what's wrong with the person, but the events or the behaviors behind what is happening. Now, you can't separate the people from the conflict. Obviously, they're in it, but it's more helpful to refer to the conflict as a problem to resolve together. Now, let me give you a little scenario here that will kind of bring this to life. Imagine you have 2 roommates, okay? We'll call them Joan and Jane, all right? Now, Joan is a college student, and she's working on her master's degree in maybe organizational leadership. And she has a roommate, Jane. And Jane's not at school anymore. She's already working. She's got her full-time job. She's making pretty good money. But these 2 gals are living together. And Jane comes home one night, and she's got a big exam coming up, right? And she's got to do some homework. Well, lo and behold, Jane is throwing a bit of a party with her friends. She's got the TV going, and they're laughing, and they're having fun. And it's just kind of a scene, and Joan can't really study with all that noise going on. Okay, so you see we got a bit of a conflict now between Joan and Jane over the atmosphere of the house. Joan wants it quiet, and Jane's she's just kind of letting off some steam to having fun with some friends, right? Nothing wrong with that. So what could Joan say here right off the bat? She might say, boy, that Jane, she sure is inconsiderate. She sure doesn't care about me and my studies, She's not a very good roommate. She's not a good person. Look at her party, and I think they're even like drinking alcohol in there. Man, what is she? I thought she was a Christian. She went to church and everything. She's in there watching Netflix and drinking beer with her girlfriends, with her friends, Okay, so right off the bat, you could see what the tendency is here for a lot of us is to kind of lay blame upon the person. But the problem really here, if you extract the people from it, is that she needs some quiet time. She needs some time to study. She needs a peaceful place. So the problem isn't that Jane is inconsiderate or not a good Christian gal or whatever, but the problem is that Joan needs a quiet place to study. Okay, so that's the scenario. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit here. But that's the first principle here, is separate the people from the problem. What is the essence of the problem here, and not the personality of the person making personal attacks and insinuations and all those sorts of things. Okay, now the second principle here is to focus on interest and not positions. Identify underlying interest behind the position. So what is an interest? Well, it's the reason behind the stand you might take. And the position is the stand that you take. So you want to get behind what the position is. What's your goal? What's your reason for why you take the position? Why you want to take that position? What are your interests and what are the other person's interests, right? Okay, so let's go back to our roommate scenario here. So what might the interest of Joan be here, right? Well, her interests are she wants to get a college degree, right? She wants to finish her master's degree from a nice school in organizational leadership. That's her interest here. It's not so much in squashing, Jane's right to party, So now, what might Jane's interest be? Well, Jane's interest is she works hard. She wants to come home. She wants to enjoy her place. There's nothing wrong with watching a little Netflix and having a beer once in a while. That's what she wants to do, right? So instead of focusing on the people and accusing each other, focus on the interest behind the position. So the position would be, from Joan's perspective, well, she's just noisy and she has to stop partying, right? She has to turn down her TV. She has to kick her friends off. That's her position. And her position is, no, I'm not going to do that. You can go study somewhere else. Okay, so those are their positions, but the interest behind them is, well, I need to get a degree, and she is, I need to blow off a little bit of steam once in a while. And there ain't nothing wrong with that, right? So you can see how both of these are valid interest and why they take the positions that they do. Okay, so that's step number 2. Think about what your interests are and think about what the interests of the other person are. Now, the third step here is to generate options for mutual gain. Brainstorm multiple solutions. Now, usually we tend to focus on one or two things, right? Like it's usually one solution. Like Joan can say, all right, here's a solution to our problem. Jane, you need to, you need to get a new set of friends. You need to get rid of that TV set. You need to be quiet every time I'm home, right? That might be her option. And Jane's like, I don't think so, girl. I'm gonna invite my friends over when I want to, right? So those would be like one solution. But if these two ladies got together, what kinds of things could they suggest? Maybe they could suggest that Jane could have friends over on Monday and Wednesday nights and Saturday nights, and Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday are quiet nights. And that's when Joan would know that she could do her homework. She could expect to come home. Okay, there's a solution. Maybe another solution would be that Jane could study, or I'm sorry, I keep confusing. Why did I pick such similar names? That Joan could study early in the morning while Jane is still asleep, right? That's another option, and that Jane promises not to interfere with her, right? So come up with multiple solutions. Come up with different ideas. Maybe she could invite her friends over, but they wouldn't watch television, so they could be more quiet. So come up with lots of different ideas to solve this the solution. It doesn't have to be, well, you have to be quiet every night, or you have to go to the library and study. It's like maybe there's some creative ways, some options, brainstorming options. So when you throw out these options, this idea of brainstorming, you want to throw out lots of ideas and don't criticize them, right? Sometimes we tend to criticize ideas as soon as they're thrown out there. But this idea of brainstorming means just come up with a bunch of ideas, and then later on we can decide which of those are the best. And then the last principle here is use objective criteria, something to base your decisions on objective standards. So in other words, how do we evaluate which of these ideas are going to be the best? Okay, so in the case of Joan and Jane, and this is hard, right? It's not always easy to come up with objective criteria. It's hard to quantify some of these things, right? But maybe, the objective criteria for this particular situation would be that there would be no TV or friends in the house like 4 nights a week, okay? So they can maybe negotiate on the nights, but that's the objective criteria. And on Jane's side, she might say, well, the objective criteria is that I'm allowed to, turn up the TV as loud as I want, right? Okay, so come up with with different ways to evaluate the solution. So as long as she has her peace and quiet on some nights, and as long as she's able to have her friends over on other nights, that's the objective criteria. Now, let me give you another case study here, all right? This is the case of the new accounting system. Now, imagine an organization. Let's move this into more of an organizational and business context here. So imagine that there's a company and the vice president wants to buy a new accounting system, and he thinks it'll reduce errors. But the accounting department doesn't want to switch. They think the current system is just fine. But the VP is looking at these reports and he sees a lot of errors in them. And he's thinking to himself, man, we really got to change it up over there. These guys, they don't have the tools that they need. So I'm going to go talk to the accounting manager there. And he goes over to the accounting manager. He says, Manny. Okay, we'll call him Manny the manager. How's that? And his name is Victor the VP. All right, so this will help me keep track of this. We got Victor and we got Manny. So Victor goes over and he says, Manny, I'm really thinking about this. Your reports are so error-filled. I know it's not you because I know you're a good accountant. You have a great resume. You've got a lot of experience. I know it's not you. It's the accounting system. And so I really want for us to implement a new accounting system to reduce some of these errors. Okay? Now, if you've ever gone through a large-scale software change, you know this is not an easy thing, right? This is real pain. A lot of things have to change. It's real challenging to get the new system on board. So Manny says, he thinks to himself real quick, he says, no way. He says, we went through this 5 years ago. This system works just fine. We ain't changing it. And unless you come over here and install the software when I'm not here in the middle of the night, it's not going to change. All right, so right now you've got a conflict, right? Because the VP thinks they should have a new system, and the accounting manager says, no, I can't put my people through that. So now, if you just look at the people side of this, the VP, Victor's going to say, boy, those Luddites over there, that Manny, they're just so out of touch. They don't realize that there's better systems out there now that could produce better results. They're just so resistant to change, and they're so incalcitrant. And Manny's thinking, man, who is this VP? This guy's only been here a year. I've been here 10 years, and he's coming over here, and he thinks he knows my department better than me, and he wants my people to go through all these work. He's not very considerate. In fact, he's kind of like micromanaging my area. This really is my decision to make. Okay, so what are they doing right off the bat? They are seeing it through the perspective of personalities, right? Now, sometimes it is personalities, right? That is a real issue for conflict. But in this situation here, they are putting it on the personality and not the problem. The problem really is whether or not they got a new system, would it be more efficient? Okay, so now let's look at the interests. So what are the interests? What are the interests behind them? Well, the interest is to either get a new system or to keep the same system, right? That's kind of their position. Their interest really is, the vice president's interest is in a more efficient system, right? And less errors. And Manny's interest is not having all of his accounting people go through the work of developing a new system, all right? So the interest here, though, is they both have the same goals, right? They both want a good accounting system here, but they're looking at it from different angles. And so the real issue is how can they avoid errors, and how can they get better reporting data? It's not the system itself or who has the right to make this decision, power trip, but it's how can we get less errors in the reporting? That's really what they're interested in. And that's a common goal, right? So you need to come up with a common goal to see this as a problem for both of you, because at the end of the day, these guys are both on the same team. They both work for the same organization. And sometimes we get in conflict with people, and because we're in different areas of different departments, we sort of lose sight of the fact that we are on the same team. We are part of the same organization that's trying to move together. So as soon as you can frame this as a mutual problem that affects both of us, right? Nobody wants errors. They don't want to be seen as having made errors. He doesn't want bad reporting, right? So this is a common thing. So their common interest here isn't to avoid errors. All right, so now let's move to the next step, coming up with some options. Well, what are some options? Well, maybe it's not the software. maybe the errors come from a certain person who's in charge of inputting data. Or maybe if they agree that they do want to change the software, maybe there's a software that's not as difficult or challenging for the new team to learn, right? Maybe it's more intuitive. Or maybe Manny's involved in selecting the software, right? Maybe he feels a little put upon because the VP is coming and telling him he has to do this. Well, nobody likes that, right? Everybody wants to be involved in making the decisions that impact them. So letting him suggest the software, right? So the issue here isn't the software per se, it's the errors. Well, maybe the errors are coming from other places, or maybe it's the nature of the software that the VP is suggesting. And then come up with some criteria for determining this. So you could look at the how much time it's going to take, right? How much time is it going to take for the accounting team to learn a new system? Right, that might be the objective criteria. Or how much will the new approach reduce errors? So let's see if it's based on a person or a process or something else. You can look at that as a possible criteria for evaluating solutions. Okay, so we've talked about negotiating. We've talked about the 4 steps of Urey and Fisher, or the 4 principles rather, all right? And then we've given a couple of examples here of typical kinds of conflicts. Now, what if you say, we're going to actually negotiate this? So it doesn't just happen in the hallway, happenstance. There's been some thoughts about how to go through a negotiating process. And so this next section here, I'm going to talk about a 7-step process that you can use for negotiating, all right? So let's go through these here real quick. The first step is actually step 0, which is to calm down and focus on the future outcomes. Now you can imagine these 2 guys, they're all heated up. The VP feels like this has to happen, and accounting manager, he's upset, right? Everybody's kind of gone to their mutual corners. First thing you want to do is you need to calm down. And because not sometimes, when our emotions are high, we know that our cognitive abilities are low, right? It's just the way God's designed us. But when we get upset, part of our brain starts to shut down, and it's more kind of fight or flight instincts, right? So the first thing you need to do is calm down so that you can reduce the emotion from the situation, because you're not thinking as good when you have the emotions high. Okay, now that's step 0. Now, step 1 is define the conflict issue and state why it's bothering you, and identify why it's bothering you. All right, so what is the reason why this is a conflict in the first place for you? So if you're Manny, you're thinking, well, this is a problem for me because first of all, I don't like being told what to do by somebody who hasn't been here as long as me, and I don't want my people to have to go through the effort and the hassle of changing, right? That's what's bothering him. It's not so much that this guy's an idiot, but it's I have a certain status here, right? So remember we talked about goals? Think about those goals. Remember we talked about goals, I think, in week 2. There's the process goals. There's also the relational goals, right? So what are some of my goals in this? So we want to think about what's bothering us in terms of some of these goals. All right, step 2, identify and evaluate your goals. All right, I just kind of jumped ahead on this one, but again, there's the topic goal. So what's the actual thing we're talking about? What's the relational goal? How do I want to keep my relationship with this person, right? So if you're Manny, you're thinking, well, this guy doesn't have the right to boss me around, but he is a VP and he is over my area here, so I do need to respect his authority, and I do want to have good relationships with him in the long term. And then, of course, the identity and process goals. So ask yourself, why do I want to resolve this conflict? What's a good resolution for me? How important is it for me that I reach this resolution? How do I want to be viewed by the other party? And how does this situation affect the way I view myself? Because we all have lots of goals. We all have our self-esteem and our roles and the work level, all these kinds of things that we have to do. You want to think through those things before you approach a negotiation. So what is it that you want out of this negotiation process? Step 3, decide to negotiate, assessing interdependence, context, relationships, risk, etc. So there's no surefire formula for this one here, but you want to think of things like this. Consider how the other party is interdependent with me. What is your leverage? And what is their interest in my being satisfied with how we work this out? So the accounting manager might say, well, he's a VP. He's got a lot more power than me in the organization. I really don't have a lot I don't have a lot of power to influence this. But on the other hand, he's the expert. He's the expert over that area. And so his position or the interdependence, the leverage that he has is the interdependence that the organization and the VP has on him. So he does have some leverage. Right? Both of those come to play. Both of them have leverage in this situation by nature of the authority of the position or the expertise. Remember, we talked about power and different types of power in an organization. Consider the context. Is this the right time and place? Sometimes, it's not always the right time to negotiate. Sometimes you need to defer it and put it off for a little bit. Don't put it off forever, right? Because that's called avoidance. Remember, we talked about dysfunctional conflict strategies, and avoidance is one of them. So you can maybe defer it for a season, for maybe a short period, but eventually you're going to have to face this thing head on. Consider the nature of the relationship. And this is why it's so important to have good relationships with people. So we have the relational capital to sit down with them and negotiate for the things that are important to us. Consider the risks. What might come up as a result of this negotiation. Maybe, the VP looks into it and he finds out that, you've got a lot of people that aren't really pulling their weight over in that department. And you're thinking, no, everybody's maxed out in my department. But I don't want to risk losing any resources that I have. And then once you decide to negotiate, assign yourself full responsibility. If it succeeds, you did it. If it fails, you did it. Own the responsibility. Okay? So, and maybe sometimes it's a big issue like this. Maybe it's just a small issue. You might say, well, I don't really want to negotiate over a small issue. It's a good time to practice your negotiating skills, right? Not everything is life or death. Sometimes find opportunities for you to just practice negotiating over small things, and you'll get better at it when it comes to some of these big things. Okay, the next step is arrange a meeting. You want to approach somebody, define the issues, and ask for a meeting. Now, the other person has to, first of all, you might say, well, I want to negotiate over this, but the other person has to agree to negotiate with you, right? You can't just jump into a conversation about it, right? So just say, Victor, the VP, and Manny, the accounting manager, are talking, and all of a sudden Victor says, okay, I want to negotiate this week. Here's the 3 things that I want you to do, and here's my position here. And he's like, what are you talking about? No, you have to have consideration for the other person and say, look, I know we have a conflict here over this. Can we make time? I would like to make time to talk about my thoughts on this, my position on this, and maybe come up with a solution that works for both of us. Remember this idea of win-win, right? So you want to approach the person in a very proactive, optimistic perspective. So approach the other person directly and privately, face-to-face. It's probably not something you want to send them an email over or a text, right? Because there's emotions. You're both feeling emotions over this thing. And so you want to do it in a relational way. Now, some people might say, well, it's better to do it, through email. Well, you lose a lot of, context in email. So whenever it's a serious conversation, most of the communication literature suggests face-to-face is always best. Refer to the conflict as a problem and not as a conflict, right? Okay, this is almost kind of, a cliche, a meme now, right? So we have a problem. What you really mean is we have a conflict. But you want to try to, again, you're getting back to these principles of negotiation. You want to refer to it as a problem, a mutual problem that both of you need to solve. And then state the issue as you defined it in step 1, right? So you're going back to your process. Say, here's why this is a problem for me. Define why it is a problem for you, and then ask for a good time to meet. All right, step number 5 is conduct the meeting. So come prepared, ready to explain your point of view and make suggestions, and be prepared to listen to the other party, right? Because chances are you're going to bring this up and they're going to say, oh yeah, well you have that problem with me. Well, I have this problem with you, right? So it can kind of open up some cans of worms. But take the lead. Excuse me. You're the one. Excuse me. You're the one. Oh, hey. I'm back. You're the one that asked for the meeting, so thank them for coming, for taking time. Then state the issue and the purpose of the meeting, that you want to find a solution that works for both of you. Okay, let them know you understand that they have some concerns here, but you want to be able to talk about your concerns and come up with a solution that works for both of you. And then ask them how they want to proceed. They may want to share their perspective. Now, what do you do if you say, you call the meeting and you want to share your problem. What if the other person brings up their problems and they try to hijack the agenda, right? Kind of this, well, you said this. What about this? Well, you thank them, you say, respond nicely, and say, we can discuss that, but I want to discuss this first. Now, why do you have the problem? Because you brought this, you brought the issue up. You're the one that asked for the meeting. So you want to address their problems, but you don't want to address their problems and let that hijack what you came to the meeting to do, right? So make sure that you get to deal with your interests and concerns first. Then step 6 is get some commitment. So once you talk and you throw out the solutions, remember we talked about giving some brainstorming and coming up with some criteria for evaluating the issues. Get some commitments and then write them down. Now, this doesn't mean you have to have a contract and sign off on it. Sometimes we get a little litigious, right? And HR people think you need to write everything down. That's an escalation, right, of the problem, of the relationship. You're risking damaging the relationship if you get it written down. Just, keep a mental note. You can write it down for yourself, but it's not something you have to sign. But write it down so that you can clearly articulate what the other person agreed to and what you agreed to. So the agreement must be clear, and it must address voluntary behavior from the present forward, because this will hold each party responsible for following through. And you can't hold somebody accountable for something in the past, right? This is where, what if, somebody offended you and you want to deal with that, right? You can't, have them agree that you can't deal with the past. All you can deal with is the kinds of behaviors that bother you in the present, So let's just say, go back to our roommate situation. Maybe there was words or they got mad at each other, but there's really nothing they can do other than that. Well, what they can do, they can reconcile, right, and ask for forgiveness and those sorts of things. That's very important, especially from a Christian perspective, right? But for this agreement here, you agree to voluntary behavior from that point going forward. Now, what if somebody says something like, let's just say you need them to change their behavior. Imagine, Joan goes to Jane and says, well, I need it to be more quiet around here. And she says, well, I'll try. Trying is not doing, right? So you have to kind of get past the try, and you actually have to get them to do that. So let me give you a good illustration that I heard of. There was a guy who always came late to work. And the boss said, well, why are you always coming late to work? And he said, well, I'm a single dad and I have to get my kids ready for school. That's why I'm late. And the boss, she was a mom and she knew the problems. This guy didn't know how to, get a toddler ready for school. And so he was always coming in late because he was dealing with these things in the morning. And she said, well, listen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to start to work on things the night before so that you can, it's not as hard for you in the morning so that you can be here on time. And he said, well, I'll try to get here on time. And she says, here's what I want to hold you accountable is to actually doing some of the things the night before, getting their clothes ready, getting their food ready, getting their backpack ready. That's what you need to do. If you do those things, if you tell me that you've done those things, then I'm not going to be worried about you showing up on time. I want you to do those things first. And he committed to that. And lo and behold, he started coming in on time. Okay, so don't take an I'll try. Make sure you give them steps, things that you actually need them to do, specific kinds of things. Step 7, follow up and see how they're doing and adjust as needed. Okay, and again, this, you always think things are going to work initially, but then you might have to tweak them. You do what you say you're going to do, right? And then pay attention to what the other person does. Now, you can't watch them like a hawk or micromanage them, right? But you want to pay attention, though, and hold them accountable. And if they do what they said, note it down and give them positive feedback. Oh, this is so important. If somebody makes a change and, they're doing what they agreed to, give them that positive affirmation. Because if they make the change and you don't, chances are they'll lapse back to that old behavior. Okay, so if Jane all of a sudden became a model roommate and she didn't have friends over when, she's told Jane she wouldn't, she has to acknowledge this. I really appreciate you like giving me more time. I really appreciate that. But if you don't acknowledge it, she's like, man, I've been working really hard here. I'm not having any friends anymore. And she doesn't even notice it. She doesn't even care. She hasn't even given me any feedback. And then she invites her friends over and they have a big party, right? So you want to acknowledge that other people are trying in order to reinforce it, right? It's kind of that reinforcement theory. You want to acknowledge people and the effort that they're making. All right, now, this sounds all clean cut and everything. Just keep in mind that this, it's not a recipe to follow. It doesn't have to always result in an agreement. Every conflict and every person is unique, and so there's no guarantee that going through this process will result in a good resolution every time. You can't control the other person in conflict, but if you go through a process like this, it can influence the outcomes, all right? So, and you have a much better chance of reaching a resolution that's going to work for all of you. So you have to kind of personalize these steps, do it in a way that's meaningful for you and the context. Again, if you're a Christian person, maybe you're doing these things in a church. Obviously, there's a lot of other dynamics in there, right? You want to pray in the meeting, you want to maybe share some scripture together, go out to break bread together, go to lunch together. There's a lot of different things. So, and sometimes we're dealing with things like broken trust and lingering hard feelings. And as Christians, we always want to work on forgiveness and rebuilding trust. I talk about that in my book. But this is important, right? It's not easy. I know we can lay these steps out, but in reality, some of these things are hard. Just getting ourselves to to be willing to talk through a conflict and negotiate. And that might be like really hard, really challenging for us. Some of us are avoidant, right? You took your test and you were avoiders. So kind of actually sitting down and confronting people here. But I'll tell you what, if you can force yourself to go through a process where you confront these things, it's going to clear the air. It's going to show that you're not a doormat that people can walk over. You're going to strengthen your relationship. If you do this well, you can strengthen your relationship with this other person. You can build trust, and things won't become as big and they won't fester. So there's a lot of upside to going through a process like this. Well, that's it for today. I know it was kind of a little bit of a long one, but hopefully this was helpful. Again, I encourage you to pick up Getting to Yes. And reading through the literature on negotiation. You might say, boy, this is really helpful. And I know we just kind of scratched the surface here, but do some additional reading on negotiating strategies, and ways to work through some of these conflicts, and it'll go a long way in helping your leadership. That's it for now. God bless you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.